Don't forget to like and subscribe, it helps a lot. Make sure you watch to the end so you don't miss a step in this ultimate weathering guide.
Maniacs, how we doing? Welcome back. Part 2 of our Tamiya M41 Walker Bulldog, aka Lil Dumpy, aka Hobby Lobby Bargain Bin Special, aka the little kit that could. Let's take this hunk of garbage and try to turn it into something remarkable. Painting and weathering, let's go. Let's get this party started with copious amounts of Vallejo Black Surface Primer with a generous dollop of Vallejo Airbrush Thinner, mixed together with a random chopstick I found in my junk drawer. Pour it all into my Sparmax Max 35 airbrush and we're ready for a night on the town. Now Vallejo primers can be very tricky to spray. They dry incredibly fast. So what I suggest is turn your pressure up to about 30, make sure that you're properly thinned, and once you start spraying, try not to stop. Typically I run into problems when I stop spraying. The paint clumps up in the cup and it dries on the tip real fast, so get everything done as fast as you possibly can. That is the only advice that I can offer to you if you spray with this particular primer. Now that being said, there are some pros to using these primers. They are cheap, they level very well, and they last forever. If you tend to spray wet like I do, you'll get a perfect finish regardless. And if you give them 24 hours to cure, they will dry semi-resilient as long as there's not a lot of humidity. As a wise old lady once said, I put that ish on everything. Coming back after a generous curing period, we can see that all of my detail has remained and I have a perfect finish. Once priming is out of the way, it's time to base coat, and for that I'm going to be using Ammo MIG USAAF Olive Drab. While planning this build, I decided to test a few of the greens out that I had in my library, and I think that USAAF is about as close as you're going to get to the real deal. The best part of waking up is ammo in your cup. So ammo paints, I'm a fan. I haven't had too many problems with them, however there's a few specificities that you have to keep in mind if you decide to use these paints. First and foremost, this is a paint that is not meant to flood a surface, and what I mean by that is you want to take your time. Unlike the Vallejo surface primer that I was spraying prior to this, you do not want to go hard and fast on this because you will make egregious tide pools all over your model and it'll be very difficult to fix afterwards. These paints are meant to be sprayed methodically. Unlike other airbrush paints, if you do not spray in thin layers, you might wind up with a very poor result. So I recommend lowering your pressure and just taking your time. As you can see here, I'm doing real thin controlled coats and the end result is awesome. MIG paint dries very, very nicely. These paints dry evenly and level and result in a beautiful finish if you do it the right way. And perhaps most important is the fact that MIG does a lot of research to ensuring that you are getting the most accurate colors possible. There are so many different shades and variations, you literally cannot go wrong. How's that for some juicy coats? Let's take a second and appreciate the sketchy drying solution that I got here. Maraschino cherry jar for my turret, and this cursed contraption for my hull. Literally playing with fire doing this, but I don't really have a choice, so gotta make do with what I have.
Now that our base coat has had significant time to dry, we can focus on doing some highlights. Some people like to do pre-shading. I'd like to do post-shading. I think it's more fun and allows you to control the color a little bit better. If I could be honest for a second, post-shading is a little bit more difficult than pre-shading to pull off. For starters, you need to have better control of your airbrush than you would with pre-shading. Second, you need to learn how to spray at lower pressures and closer to your object. And if you don't do this properly, you can get some weird anomalies like splattering, ghosting, and other types of things that you don't want on your model. Third, instead of spraying white or black paint to get highlights and artificial shadows, you need to learn color modulation. Color modulation is when you take two or more colors and mix them together in a blend to get a different shade of your base coat. In this case, I'm using the original olive drab mixed with some hemp, and I'm getting this nice light color. And finally, post-shading is much less forgiving than pre-shading. If you make a mistake, you're going to have to respray it with base coat to make it go away. That turns a lot of people off, myself included, so make sure you know what you're doing before you actually start spraying anything. Just take a minute and imagine the look that you're going for. Just look at these creamy blends that you get with post-shading. Almost forgot, super importante. You want to make sure that you thin your paints appropriately to do your post shading. You want them almost translucent, if that makes sense, so you can build up the effect rather than pull it on. Highlights are done, and they're looking pretty spicy. Now don't worry, if you do not get the effect that you intended, like your highlights are a little too bright, once you varnish over your model, the contrast will get more saturated and it'll look much better, I promise. Now if you really want to flex on your haters, take a color that's even lighter than your highlights and go over all the small raised details on your model. Things like handles, bolts, and rivets. You'll draw significant visual interest to these items and overall make your model look that much better. It's just the creme de la creme, or the piece de resistance. Alright, time to detail paint some small and frustrating parts. My favorite thing about model building. Made even worse by the fact I'm trying to film this whole thing, and I'm holding this at a very awkward angle because my camera's in the wrong place. Listen, kids, don't become model builder YouTubers. It's not worth it. So the M41 Walker Bulldog had 4 lamps. 3 of them were normal lamps, I believe, and one of them was an IR illuminator. So the normal lamps I'm painting with a MIG silver, and the IR lamps getting painted with a Vallejo black. I cannot wait until I'm done doing this. It is a pain. So there's a couple tools which come with this kit that are independently molded from the rest. So this sledge here, I'm painting with a polished metal by MIG. Painting the handles for my tools with, get this, Tester's wood. It's an acrylic color, and it's literally like 8 or 9 years old. I think I just found it in a drawer somewhere. For some reason, it's still good. It's probably made with like the devil's piss or something. But anyway, I like this color, and it's easy to modulate later on with oils. So originally I wanted to go with khaki for the jerry cans, but it looks too blue to me, so instead I went with hemp. Hemp is a good jerry can color, and it stands out from the OD green. There's only one color that's suitable for this Ma Deuce or any other mounted machine gun, and that is Lead Belcher by Citadel. It is the perfect combination of black and polished metal. I think it looks excellent on mounted guns. Painting road wheels, no explanation needed. Everyone hates doing it. All I'm using is a MIG flat black. That's it. One tip that I can provide though is use a liner brush or a brush with a relatively sharp tip and just follow the rim line around the tire. It's the easiest way to do it. Here we're using a gloss black on the Commander's hatch viewports. I think it's the best color. Some people like using like a silver backing to them. I'm not a big fan of it. I'd rather just use black. Now that I got most of the big ticket items out of the way in terms of detail painting, I can focus on weathering. And to start my weathering adventure, I'm going to add a little bit of rust, these steel tools, and some corrosion to these exhaust pipes, which make an excellent candidate for some pigment that's thickened up with a little bit of binder. I like using pigment in this fashion because it adds texture and it's a better demonstration of corrosion than you'll be able to obtain with a paint. The important thing here to remember is that you want to use a little bit of variation, so don't just use one color, use a couple and add some depth. I also went back and decided to do a little bit more fine detail painting. I saw a reference photo of an M41 in a French museum that had the lugs of its drive sprocket painted red and the lugs on its road wheels painted white, and I thought it looked pretty cool and I wanted to replicate it here. One of the standard basic weathering techniques that most modelers employ to give a well-worn look to their vehicles is sponge chipping. In this specific instance, I'm not going to go overboard with it. I just want to add a little bit of wear to hard edges and to spots that I think are going to be well worn due to foot traffic or brushing up against things. Super easy technique to employ. You just get a sponge with a color that's lighter than your base coat. In this instance, I'm using a mixture of OD green and hemp, and you want to just lightly tap until you get some paint transfer. So you want to wipe away most of the paint that's in the sponge on like a paper towel until you just have enough where you can kind of like almost dry blot it on. You also don't have to use a sponge if you don't want to. Other convincing effects can be made with a liner brush and your chipping paint. Like in this case here, I'm just gently scratching away at the surface of my base coat to give it a very convincing worn look. I would consider something like this to be acute paint damage, where this was done in the moment where the tank was operating and brushed up into something like some brush or something, you know, like undergrowth, and had some of its paint stripped away, but not so severe that it looks like it's flaking off. I also really like using this brush technique on the edges of hatches and also on like exhaust manifolds. I see a lot of M41 models that are completely rusted out and look like they've been abused. I'm not about that life, so I wanted to add some custom scratches and some rust chipping myself with the brush. And if you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can layer your chips with different colors. So you can have like your primer layer and maybe a little bit of bare metal if you want damage severe enough, followed up with a little bit of corrosion and rust. My philosophy has always been less is more. All too often I see armor modelers using way too many weathering techniques or too much of one technique, and it just looks ridiculous. You want something that looks tastefully weathered rather than beat to death. The beat to death look might look good, but it's not accurate in my opinion, and it really detracts from the overall thing that you're trying to do. It's a good practice, and some may disagree with me, to gloss varnish your model when you're done with your detail painting, especially if you're using MIG paints and plan on using some kind of enamel panel liner. Too many times I've used Tamiya panel liner, which is a hotter wash, and watched all of my hard work bubble and disintegrate and have to start over from scratch. I found myself straying away from Tamiya panel liner. While it's an excellent product and has great opacity, I really like to use my own washes that I make with oil. In this instance, I'm going to use some Ibtalung 502 engine grease and some Winsor & Newton lamp black to make my own wash. Give it a couple squirts of AK odorless enamel thinner and mix vigorously with a toothpick, and you can make your own fantastic washes with little effort that will not damage your paint. Just load up your nice pointy liner brush and go to town on them cracks and crevices. And if you happen to get a little bit overzealous with your lining, that's okay too. Get a little bit of thinner and blot it out onto the surface of your paint, and it looks like a nice watered down grime and grunge. I really like doing this because you can feather in the effect to your heart's content. You can get it as greasy and dirty as you want, or as translucent as you want. It's all up to you. I tend to employ brown washes on greens like OD green or 4BO. I think they just look better. The contrast ratio is just more appealing than black. Don't be afraid to get it up in them rims and wheels. I know you want to. Moving on with the next stage of oil work, I'm going to work on a dot filter. Since I'm using the effect on OD green, I'm going to be using a white, a green, and a yellow to get the effect that I want. Dot filters are exactly what they sound like. Tiny dots of oil paint that help modulate and also create some streaky effects. Once you get your dots on the spots that you want to subject to this effect, you take a flat brush that is slightly damp with odorless enamel thinner, and you drag the paint down as you see here. Once you're done with your first pass, you want to re-dip your brush in your odorless enamel thinner, clean it off, get it damp again, and then repeat the effect until you get exactly the amount of modulation and streaking that you're looking for. If you repeat the process enough, you get some nice streaks that are barely visible and convincingly streaky. Is that even a word, streaky? I think you guys know what I mean here. Ah, perfection. Alright, we've demonstrated quite a few painting and weathering techniques. We're on the home stretch, and I think we're going to start to wrap things up. First, we're going to lay down our beautiful water slide decals, which came with the kit. Now, some of you may be wondering why, after all this work, I decided to just lay water slides over some of my weathering effects. Well, it's because I go back and I re-weather the spots where the decals are laid down. Totally forgot, I had MIG engine oil effects. It's an enamel product, it dries glossy, it looks really cool, adds a nice little touch to your oil and gas caps. And I have to dirty up the wheels a little bit. While I don't want to go full-blown dirt and grime on everything, I do want it to match the rest of the weathering that I've already done, so I'm going to use a little Vallejo sand wash. to get a little bit of accumulated garbage up in these rims. It's just going to make them look better overall, I think. I also went back and added a little bit more of my brown wash to try and blend the colors, because I think the sand is just a little bit too stark for what I'm looking for. I also went back and added a little extra pigment to the areas I think are going to see some kind of foot traffic or going to accumulate some kind of dirt. Just giving it another very mild layer of depth, which I think is going to add to my model. Alright, now we're going to do our rubber band tracks. Not going to go crazy on this. There's a lot of tutorials already on YouTube. We're going to spray down a mixture of flat black and Panzer Gray to get our base. Going to layer in our Vallejo sand wash to get some added depth. Then we're going to use the rust washes from earlier, a light, a medium, and a dark rust, and we're just going to dab in a very inconsistent and random pattern to try and give these detailless tracks a little bit of life. Then we are going to use our Vallejo pigments, the different rust effects that I have, to add even more depth and contrast with the washes that we put in. Take a wet Q-tip and go over all the track pads to get all that rust off of them, because we all know that rubber doesn't rust. Some Sahara sand to deaden all the colors out and make them look a little bit dusty. And boom, you made a respectable set of tracks out of a piece of garbage clown car that came in the kit. I am done. There is no more painting, weathering, or any other effect that needs to be added to this. It is time to showcase it and show you all the fruits of my labor. Enjoy! Alright, we're at the finish line at last, and the final product is pretty nice. And to be honest, I was contemplating not building this at all, considering the first time I tried, it turned out to be a relative failure. It just goes to show you what a little bit of perseverance and ingenuity will get you in the end. That being said, I still believe this is one of the best beginner kits you can get your hands on. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. I'll see you again on the next one. Bye bye for now.